born in Bethlehem. Do you know much about Bethlehem? Well, you do indirectly, but you don't as far as it pertains to Christ. Of whom do we know that is famous in the history of Bethlehem of Judea other than Jesus Christ? The answer is the one that was later or earlier called King David. Because what had happened is that in Luke, the second chapter, if you'll go over, you'll find out that the land of Christ's nativity through his stepfather Joseph had made it to where they had to go back and pay their taxes. Let's turn over to Luke, the second chapter, and verse 1. It came to pass in those days that there went out a decree from Caesar Augustus that all the world should be taxed. And this taxing was first made when Cyrenius was governor of Syria. And all went to be taxed, everyone to his own city. And Joseph also went up from Galilee out of the city of Nazareth into Judea, unto the city of David, which is called Bethlehem, because he was of the house and lineage of David, to be taxed with Mary, his espoused wife, being great with child. And so it was that while they were there, the days were accomplished that she should be delivered. She brought forth her firstborn son, wrapped him in swaddling clothes, and laid him in a manger, because there was no room for them in the inn. Interestingly, this was something that was intriguing. Now go back to Matthew, the second chapter. And in Matthew, the second chapter, in verse 2, when the wise men from the east came to Jerusalem, they said to King Herod, "Where is he that is born King of the Jews? For we have seen his star in the east and are come to worship him." Now, if you read these things, you'll think that one was a concurrent event with the other. But when you look back at the history of the situation, you'll find out that they weren't. Because in Luke, the second chapter, if you'll flip back over there, you'll see that Joseph went up from Galilee out of the city of Nazareth unto Judea, unto the city of David, which is called Bethlehem. Then when you look at Matthew, the second chapter, you will find out that when Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea, in the days of Herod the king, there came wise men from the east to Jerusalem. Now, how many times have you seen manger scenes that have colored your vision and understanding of these events? I've been in East Tennessee, I've been in Michigan, I've been all over the country where these people have these scenes outside. I've seen these scenes go through snow. I've seen them go through rain. I've seen them go through heated weather, because sometimes in Florida it's kind of nice and warm in the middle of June. I've seen a lot of these incidences, but in all the time that I've seen these things take place, I never knew where Jesus was born. Now, it helped me when I got to thinking about it. Well, gee, this is David's country. What was David famous for? David was not a house sitter. David was not allowed to eat with his brothers at the table of the home. He was considered, frankly, an individual who was illegitimate in his beginning by his father Jesse. And Jesse, according to what we have been told, had decided that he was going to go and have an affair with a full-blooded Jewish female. Now, there's a reason for this. Jesse was not a full-blooded Jew. If you'll go back to Jesse, you'll find out his daddy's name was Boaz, and his mother's name was Ruth. Ruth, if you will go back and look at the book of Ruth, was not a Jew at all. Go back over there. It won't help you. It'll hurt you. Let's go back over to the book of Ruth. Now, a lot of us have read the book of Ruth, and sometimes we don't pay attention to what we read. And when we don't, we find ourselves embarrassed by somebody that has been more involved than we have. Are you in the book of Ruth? Read the first 3 or 4 verses of the book of Ruth, and you'll find out that she was from a tribe or a nation of people that was, for some reason, my Bible is not working tonight, and I don't have it here with me. Who's got the first 2 or 3, 5 or 6 verses of Ruth? Read it.
Now it came to pass in the days when the judges ruled that there was a famine in the land, and a certain man of Bethlehem, Judah, went to dwell in the country of Moab, he and his wife and his 2 sons. The name of the man was Elimelech. The name of his wife was Naomi. And the names of his 2 sons were Nahlan and Chilion. Ephroditus of Bethlehem, Judah. And they went to the country of Moab and remained there. Then Elimelech, Noah's husband, died, and she was left and her 2 sons. Now they took wives of the woman of Moab, and the name of the one was Orpah, and the name of the other Ruth. And they dwelt there about 10 years. Then both Nahlan and Chilion also died. So the women survived her 2 sons and her husband.
Okay. They had given up on the provisions of the Lord. And as they had given up on the provisions of the Lord, they went to Moab. It must have been that there was not a drought or there was not a problem with the crops in Moab. And when they went back to Moab, they're taking their 2 sons and not considering the effect that it would have on time or history. There they married 2 women of the Moabites. Now, if you'll go back to the book of Genesis, the 18th and the 19th chapters, you'll find out that the Moabites were famous because they were those whom the nephew of Abraham had been involved with as his daughters when they came out of the fire that raged when God came down to destroy the plains cities of the east. Are you there? In Genesis, the 18th and the 19th chapters, the Lord appeared to Abraham in the plains of Mamre. The plains of Mamre were outside of 5 great cities. These 5 great cities we know as Sodom and Gomorrah. There were other cities that were there, but in verse 20 of chapter 18, the Lord said, because the cry of Sodom and Gomorrah is great. So we know where they are. So God sent 2 of the deity to Abraham. And when he came to Abraham, Abraham offered a sacrifice for them, and then 2 of the other parts of deity, and we know not who they were, went to the city to destroy it. Look at verse 13 of chapter 19. We'll destroy this place because the cry of them is waxing great before the face of the Lord, and the Lord has sent us to destroy it. And Lot went out and spake unto his sons-in-laws, which married his daughters, and said, now here again we have a full-bred Jew marrying a Gentile. So it gets worse. When the sun came up on the earth, in verse 23, Lot, of course, had escaped from Sodom and Gomorrah with his wife. And she turned around to look and see what God had done to Sodom and Gomorrah, which she was told implicitly not to do. And when she did, she turned to what? Salt. And she is by a lot of people called Salty for short, as a nickname. And so when they turned around, they got to the mountains, and Lot had with him his 2 daughters. Now we'll follow the story. Verse 30, are you with me? And Lot went up out of Zoar and dwelt in the mountain, and his 2 daughters with him. For he feared to dwell in Zoar, and he dwelt in a cave, he and his 2 daughters. Now, you may not appreciate this, but they saw this place being burnt and melting down. And nobody had given them the information that this wasn't the end of the world, that this wasn't the way the Lord was going to destroy the earth the second time. And so because of that, the daughters of Lot came up with an idea. Verse 31, the firstborn said unto the younger, our father is old, and there's not a man in the earth to come unto us after the manner of all the earth. So they decided they would be Noah the second, or that Lot would be the progenitor of the human race. So they said, come, let us make our father drink wine, and we will lie with him, that we may preserve seed of our father. And they made their father drink wine that night, and the firstborn went in and lay with her father, and he perceived not when she lay down, nor when she arose. And it came to pass on the morrow that the firstborn said unto the second, or the younger, behold, I lay yesternight with my father. Let us make him drink wine this night also, and go thou in and lie with him, that we may preserve seed of our father. Now, you know what is not stated is that when they left Sodom and Gomorrah, they took along with them liquor. That never is a good accompaniment to a child of God. I don't care who you are, or what you think, or what you say. It always causes trouble. It's something that man can't control, and it's something that God has despised from the beginning of time. So they got him drunk again. Verse 35, they made their father drink wine that night also. And the younger arose and lay with him, and he perceived not when she lay down, nor when she arose. In other words, he was out of it. Thus were both the daughters of Lot with child by their father. And the firstborn bare a son, and called his name Moab. The same is the father of the Moabites to this day. And the younger, she also bare a son, and called his name Ben-Ami. The same is the father of the children of Ammon unto this day. So, was it sin? Was it something that God would allow? Absolutely not. And because of that, these 2 nations of people came into the world. When these 2 nations came into the world, they were the ones who vexed and brought problems to the children of Israel when they came out of the land of Egypt. When they caused these problems, they were not to be involved with the sons of Israel. You remember the story of the Gentile prophet, who in Numbers, the 24th chapter, let's just go through the story since we're doing it. In Numbers 24, he had been called by the king of the Moabites to curse the children of Israel. Balaam, who was the Gentile prophet, had decided that he ought to serve God, and he went to God and tried to cop a plea. Now, God, he said, that gold looks awful good. He's promised to fill it up. I don't know if the Aztec Indians read this story back in the early history of the Americas or not, but it seems to me like that this is awful coincidental, that the same thing that happened here is the same thing that happened when Cortez and the Spanish came to the Americas and captured the king of the was it the Aztecs or the Incas? Aztecs. And had them fill up a room full of gold before they'd turn loose their king. So it's an interesting story. But God is not a man, verse 19, chapter 23, that he should lie, nor the Son of Man, that he should repent. Hath he said, and shall he not do what he said, or do it? Or hath he spoken, and shall he not make it good? So, behold, I have received commandment to bless, and he hath blessed, and I cannot reverse. This is the story of Jacob and Esau. Now, all of these things happen so that we have the thing with Ruth and Naomi, because Naomi went back with Mahlon and the other boy with her husband, and he died there. And when things got right, there was nobody to work. They didn't have any food. So the thing that Naomi decided to do was to go home. And when she went home, the two daughter-in-laws that she had, one said she'd stay, and the other said no, she would go where Naomi went. You know, you've heard this. Entreat me not to leave thee, for my God shall be your God, and my people your people. So this is the story of Naomi and Ruth. And then, of course, Boaz was Naomi's cousin about 5 times removed. And when the children of Israel did not have Obama welfare, what they did have was the Jewish law that God had given them, that their people were to be fed. And they did this by allowing them to glean the outer edges of the fields so that these people who had no one to provide for them could go out and glean, that is, pick what was left behind from the pickers, and they could take it for food. This, of course, got the attention of Boaz when he was out checking his fields, and he ran across Ruth. And you know the story of Ruth, but the fact is that Boaz and Ruth were married. And from what we can understand about the scriptures, the night of their marriage was the night that Ruth was impregnated by Boaz, and the next morning Boaz died. So he was raised with a Gentile mother and a Jewish grandmother in the home of a wealthy Jew who had great substance. And then that child that came from that birth was the father of Jesse. And Jesse, of course, then feeling self-righteous, but very insecure in his position as a Jew, because he knew he really wasn't one. He was a half-breed. He decided, according to Jewish history, to make sure that he had one son that was pure-blooded Jew. So Jesse got his maidservant, who was also the maidservant of his wife, and got her to get a Jewish woman where there was not any question at all concerning her Jewish ancestry. And they arranged a meeting, so Jesse went to her and went into her, and that night she conceived. The problem is that the maidservant of Jesse was also the maidservant of Jesse's wife. And Jesse's wife was approached by the maidservant and said, "Do you know what your husband's going to do?" Well, she had no idea. Now, they'd had 7 sons, and to the time the 7th son was born, they had really not been ones that got involved in processing childbirth. And there had been a long time that they were not regularly involved with each other. So that night, Jesse's wife got herself all fixed up, changed the color of her hair maybe, changed the clothes that she wore, put on makeup. She did what most times women would do to keep their husband interested, but a lot of times forget that they should keep them interested in the fact that they are their not only their bride, their sexual partner, and that interest needs to be sustained. And of course she was impregnated. And the child that was born was David. Now, everybody knew that Jesse's wife was pregnant, but they thought she had been slipping around and got caught. So when Jesse was raising his sons, who were pure-blooded as far as the world knew, Jews, they were being raised by a man who was a half-breed that wanted to be full-bred. Now, it is said by the Jewish rabbis that of all of the men that ever lived, the greatest scholar of Jewish history and laws and regulations was Jesse, the son of Obed, who was the son of Boaz, who was the son of Boaz and Ruth. It may be that because he felt so deprived and so lowly and so lack of qualifiedness, he wanted to get the law down so much that he was looking for something that we didn't know he was looking for. And when he was that great a scholar, he raised himself in the eyes of the Jewish people, and they thought he was the greatest scholar that had ever lived. In fact, he is supposedly greater than Hillel and Shammai, who were the greatest Hebrew scholars at the time that Jesus was here on the earth. And then, of course, there was Gamaliel, which we know about, who became a member of the church. Now, I wanted to go into all this for a reason. We know about Bethlehem. We know that because David was raised in Bethlehem, what David was known as for the first 16 to 18 years of his life. It was a hilly country. It was a country of caves. It was a country of wild animals. There were bear, lions, and all of those critters that were in the hills. And Jesse used David to get him away from the house, to keep him away from his legitimatized sons. Jesse used David to get David out there to defend the herds and the flocks. And David was a great warrior. Now we know this from history and study. But what we've not realized, that Bethlehem didn't change. In Bethlehem, there were caves. These caves, there were many of them, were those places that a lot of times the Jewish people of Bethlehem kept their animals in the wintertime. And they also were used by visitors who came that had no money or receipt to gain, and they would stay in these caves overnight or for a period of time and there be able to sustain themselves out of the weather. Now we come to the story of the birth of Jesus. When I was reading the discussion between Justin Martyr and Trypho, that's Trypho if you want to go back and read that for yourself. When I was reading this, Justin Martyr mentioned the cave of Bethlehem wherein Jesus was born. Now here in my little world, I had a manger. And this manger was out in the weather. And this manger was made of wood slats in which there were gaping holes. And I often envisioned the fact that if it was in December the 25th, somebody was going to get cold and freeze to death. What I didn't realize is that where Joseph gained access to a place, or for a place to marry, to give a rest to Mary, his betrothed wife, and they were betrothed, they were not actually man and wife as man and wife become, but Mary was pregnant and great with child, that he had gone into a cave. I had heard all my life about the Church of the Nativity. But knowing the Roman Catholics like I know the Roman Catholics, I thought they just come up with a neat name and it didn't have anything to do much with the birth of Christ. But in actuality, it does. Because the cave on which the top of the rock, and there were rocks all over Bethlehem, that's known for that. The cave in which Christ was born, they actually went back in the 3rd century A.D., and Constantine II had a mother by the name of Helena. And Helena requisitioned or put up the money to go and build a church building on the top of the mountain or rock or cave or however you want to address it, and put a church building there in honor of Christ. They did that in those days. In the 3rd and 4th centuries, the Roman Catholics would go around and they would build church buildings on these special religious sites in that period of time. And Helena, being the mother of Constantine II, was the one that put up the money. Well, of course, you know the territory over there. Right next door were the Syrians. And if you know anything much about history, you'll know in the 3rd and 4th century, Muhammad came along. And Muhammad started the religion of Islam. And the religion of Islam was always intended to destroy, or tried to destroy, Christianity. So the exchange of ownership for the Church of the Nativity changed 4, 5, 6 times in the next 700 or 800 years until the Crusades. And the Crusades, of course, brought on a different story, and it was involved with the Church of the Nativity. It was involved with Bethlehem, all these things. But the point I was trying to make, in all my study, I'd never heard of this. I'd never run across this. And therefore, I didn't know. Well, I was appalled. In fact, I even got my wife up out of the bed to bring her in there and tell her about it. And it became interesting to me, so I began to study it a little bit more. It was the Church of Christ that assembled at Bethlehem that Helena was supposed to have started, but in fact, she was following her son, Constantine II, and it wasn't the Church of Christ as we know it today, but a segment of Roman Catholicism that practiced Christianity in their own particular Latin fashion. Now, that's a long story, but it helps you to understand at least about the cave of Bethlehem. It is and was a noted thing for people who would visit that area to go by and pay patronage to that cave and give monies and supply food. And there's one king that sent the wood, one king of the England sent the lead, one king of France sent this, one king of this, and they all put together all of this money. I guess they were practicing for the Crusades, but they did all this so that they could build that church building. It was destroyed, rebuilt, destroyed, and was rebuilt, and then is destroyed again. And as late as 2002, I believe it is, had a new roof put on it. So it still exists. But what's interesting to me is that when the wise men came from Herod in Jerusalem, they visited the cave at Bethlehem. Now let's read again. Now let's go. It says here in Matthew, the 1st chapter, that the star, which of course was the representative of Christ, it's the star. We'll start with verse 1 again. Now when Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea in the days of Herod the king, behold, there came wise men from the east to Jerusalem, Now these men traveled from India, Pakistan, China, Russia. There were more than 3, and they had a great group of men providing for them and making sure they were protected. But they came and they said, "Where is born the King of the Jews? We have seen his star." Now it was the Gentile prophet, Balaam, that prophesied the star would be the sign that would show this was the Son of God. I've already taught you that this star was not like the stars of the heavens. This was a star in the heavens, but it was a low-lying, low-flying. It was something that was visibly recognized and seen. And as a prophecy, the people who recognized this prophecy were the Magi. Now, the Magi were usually the Islamists. These were usually those people who followed the predictions of Muhammad, and going all the way back to the time of Methuselah, were they who had a secret society that knew things that the world didn't know. And when these kings saw this, of course, they got their groups together and came. Where they joined, we don't know. How they came together as a group, we don't know. But the fact is that they did come. But where they came to was not Jerusalem. When they found the Christ child, they came to Bethlehem. Now let's look at verse 1 again. Now when Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea in the days of Herod the king, behold, there came wise men from the east to Jerusalem, saying, "Where is he that is born King of the Jews? For we have seen his star in the east and are come to worship him." Now, when they built the first church building over the cave at Bethlehem, they had built or put together or configured a giant silver star, which was later stolen by the Muslims and then brought back as a cheap replica about 500 years later. But the star was the symbol to show which cave was the place that Christ was born. Now, if you'll go over back again to Luke 2, you'll find out that when these men came, Joseph had come out of Nazareth into Judea. You see, when Mary had Christ, it was that there was a curse put on Bethlehem by a Roman emperor that people were not to raise children of Jewish nativity in Bethlehem. And if they were, they would be subject to death. So Joseph went with Mary and took Jesus to Mary's place of residency, her birthright, Nazareth. And because the Bible says that this was prophesied by the Lord. So Joseph had been in Galilee, and he went out of the city of Nazareth into Judea, unto the city of David, which is called Bethlehem, because he was of the house and lineage of David, to be taxed. And he took with him Mary, his estranged or espoused wife, not estranged, espoused wife, being great with child. And it was so that while they were there, the days were accomplished that she should be delivered. And she brought forth her firstborn son, and wrapped him in swaddling clothes, and laid him in a manger, because there was no room for them in the inn. Hopefully this kind of fills some gaps for you that it filled for me as I was studying this, because I had a completely different understanding based on what I had known of mangers, based on the fact that I thought that this was the flat, level ground of Fort Pierce, Florida, or even if it was in East Tennessee. We just didn't go and live in caves up there too often. Even the Cherokee built houses. And based on that fact, I thought that this manger was a temporary place that was put up to house the animals. Well, in a sense that's true, but in a sense that wasn't true, because the animals were stored in there and kept in there for the winter and the weather. But it was also a place that strangers would use when they came to town and there was no room in the domiciles where humans could rent or get a room to stay for the night. So, it's everything I can find, and I've gone through 5 or 6 sources to try to find this, and you can do the same for yourself. There was a cave, is a cave. It does exist today. The Roman Catholics have done us a favor in that they have built a church building on top of this cave. And of course they're going to make their money. They have then gone inside the cave and built it, and then it was destroyed, and rebuilt it, and it was almost destroyed. And so they built it again. So it is a church building on the Roman Catholic style of buildings. And that is where that place exists, in a place where they claim Jesus was born. Now, on the fact of the very place where Jesus was born, in the very manger, of course, it was made of wood, and it would not be something that was last at all. So what the Roman Catholics did is that they put this star, and this place where Jesus was born was in the lower recesses of the cave, and it was something that the animals couldn't, as far as we know, get to, and therefore bother the Christ child. So, in putting all these facts and figures together, this kind of takes the whammy out of the cold weather birth of Jesus and God being cruel to his only begotten Son and sending him during a snowstorm on December the 25th. It also takes away the idea that when Jesus was born, there were weather conditions that were inclement, because in Luke we find the shepherds were in their field watching flocks by night. And as they were out there in the night, they were out of the caves. Being out of the caves, there would be plenty of caves that would be open for people to come through and find a place to reside for a period of time until they could pay their taxes. And they paid their taxes because a Gentile king, a Roman emperor, Herod Augustus, had determined that this would be the place where Joseph had to go back to pay his taxes. Hopefully this made some sense to you, and it's a historical lesson, I guess, in sense, but it does verify some things that beforehand I had never known. And honest to God, I have all my life thought that this manger was an exterior building out on the flat plains of Bethlehem, which, by the way, there aren't many at all, and that it was subject to inclement weather. And I felt kind of bad for the Lord, because the swaddling clothes, which were, by the way, not proper attire for a child, the swaddling clothes that she wrapped him in were just things that she carried with her for her use as a woman. Was that she wrapped him in and laid him in a manger in the cave, at the bottom recesses of the cave, to protect him from any animals. And not in the winter time, but in the time that it would be subject for animals to go in there and be kept overnight. And of course, at this period of time, they wouldn't be kept overnight. They kept them in the fields, because the weather was something that they could live in as they stayed out. So the caves of Bethlehem. Trypho knew about it. Justin Martyr knew about it. We have many of the brethren of the 1st and 2nd and 3rd century mentioning it after I found out about it. And it was something that maybe we should have been taught but never were. But at least now you know, and you can use this to maybe help yourself, help your friends who have been taught by Roman Catholics to believe another lie in their stories and categories of lies, that this just mounts up to be even more of the same. If you need to respond to the invitation of the gospel, will you come as we stand?